It's been out for almost 2 months, and I counted it down. And then I had nothing to say. At least that's what it seemed like on the surface. In reality, I haven't made many statements regarding Scarlet and Violet because I didn't know what to say. When these games started having new information revealed about them, I became super optimistic. The most optimistic I've been about a new Pokémon release since the old days. And when the games released, my reaction was unapologetically positive. Just go listen to my immediate thoughts on my podcast, which, side note, yes, it's been on hiatus and that's because I'm rebooting it with more of a solid show format in place. But what I think is interesting is what happened to me in between the time I recorded my initial thoughts for my podcast and the time where, as of now, I've done almost everything that can be humanly possible to do in the game. My opinions on Scarlet and Violet had what I'd call something like an inverse bell curve. Normally when I think of the term bell curve, I think of this, something that starts off low, rises, and falls again towards the end. Scarlet and Violet, interestingly, was the opposite of that visual. When I first started playing, my first impressions were overwhelmingly positive, so much so that I was incapable of seeing anything bad at all. I willingly ignored every obvious bad thing because I felt like the game nailed the core gameplay so perfectly that I didn't care. It was when I actually started playing through the main game past the opening where things took a downhill turn. I was now in unfamiliar territory. This was a new region with new Pokémon selections, new mechanics, and most importantly, a completely different approach to world design and progression. I was lost, and in short time, Scarlet and Violet completely fell apart for me. See, the thing is, when I'm playing a game, if I know what I'm doing, I can have fun regardless of ancillary details like graphical fidelity, frame rate, stability, draw distance, performance, and polish. After all, I'm playing a game, and if I can just play the game, I'm good. But the problem was, I was just as new to Scarlet as I was new to Sapphire version when I was a kid. Part of the quality of video games is the player experience. I think it can be stated as a fact that Ruby and Sapphire, the third main set of Pokemon games, were incredibly polished games. They had good, and this is a game design term, so bear with me if this gets a little dry. They had good game feel. I was exposed to Pokemon as early as Gen 1, but didn't actually own a Pokemon game until Gen 3, which in hindsight was the perfect starting point. Gen 3 played well. When I first played Sapphire version, I knew the bare minimum about how Pokemon games worked. I learned as I went, I tried different things, and when I got to many big moments in the game, I'd have to fail many times until I'd succeed. But despite how new everything was to me, despite how I'd had almost no experience with RPG games at that age, there's a reason why Sapphire kept hold of my attention. The game feel. Everything felt so natural and fluid. Moving around the overworld was responsive. Menus and UI were lightning fast and crunchy. Battles had nice slick animations and moved along at a quick pace. Even random encounters felt so natural, I'd just be running around and... alright, we're there. There was so much polish on everything, doing anything in this game felt pleasant. The only thing I had to be patient for was my own shortcomings as an inexperienced Pokemon player. This was the perfect environment to facilitate someone to go from clueless about type matchups to someone who is building their own creative teams to use in the battle tower. Game feel is important. Once again, in Scarlet and Violet, I was new to a lot of things. I didn't know about Terra raids, Terra types, picnics, food, TM availability, Titans, Let's Go commanding, revised catch odds, where to go first, how to breed without the daycare. I felt like a newcomer. But this time, the game wasn't a pleasant environment to learn in, which is ironic given the game's academia theme to its story. I'm not saying the game doesn't do a good job teaching its new mechanics and even returning mechanics for first-timers. No, far from it. I'm saying that messing around and learning this stuff is less fun when the game environment and feel can't stand on its own before the player has everything figured out. I could no longer ignore the issues. The game did not run well. The frame rate dropped all the time, and it got harder and harder to ignore. Things I thought about the game that were huge triumphs or even simple wins, like the seamless transitions in and out of battle, the fast travel system, the stylized Pokédex screen, the way text prompts wouldn't interrupt gameplay, none of that mattered when the game itself didn't either run or present itself well. When the game runs like absolute ass 80% of the time, who cares about the streamlining or the improvements when doing stuff in the old games would still feel better to play simply on the merit of the game running properly? Oh wow. Yeah, I started feeling kind of negative. These areas felt too open and empty. I missed the days of the old games where every 5 seconds I'd be running into an interesting landmark. I missed when just battling trainers along the way was how your team got better. There was no mucking around with random wild Pokemon once I had a team going if I didn't want to. But here, it felt like once I started having fun, like when I got to the Cloth Titan, which was a fun set piece, and spent a little time with Arvin, which left me with some burning unresolved questions about what was up with him, I was spat back out into this poorly rendered open world. Even after having a good experience with my first gym battle, and liking the gym leader's character design, and finding his battle fun and surprisingly challenging for where my team was at, I still felt like this game was barely going through the motions of a Pokemon game, while touting its big open areas as an improvement over how things used to be. This is the stuff I could only dream of Pokemon doing as a kid, but once I got used to how this game worked, I couldn't keep being impressed on that alone. But man, the game started off so strong. The opening section of the game set up the adventure so well, I still needed to see how this game, both story and gameplay, would turn out. So, I was fully committed to playing through the whole game blind. And man, am I glad I did. Pokémon Scarlet might be a first for me in that this is a game where I think more than one thing can be true at once. 1. This game has problems, isn't well polished, has poor performance, and was pushed out too soon. And 2. This is one of my all-time favorite Pokemon games. Let me explain. Similar to how the initial first impressions of the game more often stopped wowing me, after more and more time passed, all of the game's issues, at least current issues because for all I know they're working on fixing some of them in a future update, stopped sticking out to me. I started getting used to how the game felt to play, and my brain kind of tuned the less appealing aspects of the game's presentation out. And I started seeing the game for what it truly was, a well-designed, creative, and imaginative game that deserved to be released in a better state. I love this game. This game delivered exactly what it promised, which I need to give it credit. I really felt like I'd gone on a huge adventure and experienced a Pokemon story on the next level. I think it means a lot coming from me since I was very positive about Scarlet and Violet pre-release. But if you listen closely to me when I talked about them back then, even back when I put out my summary of all the reveals and release before I actually started playing the game, there's quite a sense of self-assuredness in there. Like, I knew exactly what I was talking about, and I was almost too confidently making predictions about exactly how the game would go beat for beat. But do you blame me when I'm talking about this series? Well, and I'm so happy to be saying this, the game completely surprised me at many points. Every time I met a new character, I thought I understood them, only to have something new come up that completely shifted my perception of them. Every time I thought I'd reached a point where I understood the game's world and lore, the rug would be pulled out from under me. Bar none, these are my favorite characters in a Pokemon video game, all of them. I am not kidding when I say that this is the first time a Pokemon game has gotten audible reactions out of me while going through the story. Of course, it did show promise even early on when the game first started up. I found the opening very entertaining. I liked the character interactions and enjoyed the immense sense of wonder and excitement I felt when going on my first trip to the academy. But I knew in the back of my head that it could all fall apart so fast. Establishing an interesting setup for characters and an adventure is one thing. Following through on that is another. Following through is exactly what the game excelled at. Everything felt planned out and deliberately paced from beginning to end. Yeah, this game may technically be open world, but I like how it's not so open as to not allow for an overarching plot to move forward. I describe the game's opening as classic Pokemon, presented through a new lens. You start out in your home, next to your bed, leave out the front door, take a quick walk and decide which of the 3 starter Pokemon you'll take with you to begin while being introduced to a rival character. You have a first battle and explore a linear path while getting the hang of battling and catching wild Pokemon. Some more story takes place as you make your way to the academy, and on the way you cross 2 sections of mild wilderness while passing through a small town in the middle. You then explore the town below the academy, then get introduced to life at the academy as classes start, and as that happens, you're introduced to the 3 main story paths. Then, after the first day of class, you go to bed. This is the end of the introductory section of the game, and now everything changes. The time skips ahead a significant amount of days until the inciting event for exploring the region takes place, the so-called treasure hunt program. At this point, the game is done telling you what to do, and it makes a point of this by having 3 different voices arguing with each other simultaneously about what you actually should be doing next. And that's it. You can take off in any direction and start doing whatever you feel like doing first. And that's what's cool about Scarlet and Violet, is the fact that a lot of this game does feel like your journey. Instead of trying something super experimental with how the story is told, they went with something incredibly simple for the main game. When you're on your own, you're on your own. You catch Pokemon, challenge the occasional trainer, maybe try a raid here or there. You do what you want to by yourself. See these points on the map? These are where you go to advance the story. I actually think the disconnected way in which the 3 paths work is actually beneficial to how immersive the plot felt for me at the end of the day. Getting to know these different characters and backstories on a separate basis felt natural and realistic. It made the world feel much larger when major characters weren't running into each other by complete coincidence. Also, it really let the individual plot threads breathe. Each story felt completely justified as its own independent, self-contained story that could have been the basis for a whole game by itself. I thought for certain going in that after finishing the game, I would have a favorite story path of the 3, which is why after finishing all 3 that I was caught off guard by the fact that I could not decide which of the 3 was my favorite. Well, story-wise. Gameplay-wise, that's easy. My favorite story to play was Path of Legends. It was fun to have boss fights against big, wild Pokemon, and I'd always feel a lot of tension when approaching them. It was fun to have Arven team up with me on the second phase with a Pokemon that he just caught. Each of these Pokemon would go on to become a permanent part of his team. In other words, I got to watch him assemble his full team in real time. After each Titan Pokemon, the picnic scenes felt like a nice breather, and having Arven go from a complete stranger to someone whose character motivations I understood completely felt like a reward as well. But most importantly, each raid defeated would yield a new power for my rideable legendary. This is why every time I replay the game, I'll probably focus on this path first like I did my first time. Unlocking more abilities for Koraidon or Miraidon makes all the difference when spending time in the overworld, and it feels like the most tangible reward for completing any of the main objectives. This story path on its own held me all the way to the end. I felt like crying when the story went in that direction. I got excited towards the end when receiving Professor Sada's instructions, and I got nostalgic when I battled Arven outside the same lighthouse we battled at the beginning. Victory Road is most certainly the most familiar concept of the 3 story paths, but the thing I enjoyed about it is how much it focused on giving the gym leaders personality and character. The objective may be familiar, but the execution is completely different, for better or for worse. Personally, I don't mind this change. Instead of entering a gym and getting past trainers and obstacles to reach the leader, instead, gym buildings are just a secretarial lobby. You take on a unique task to challenge each gym leader. Battles do happen on the way, but there's more of a focus on just doing something that leads up to the actual battle. There's less battling to reach the gym leader, but the variety in what you do to reach the battle feels more in line with the open world design of the game. I love this game's gym leader cast. They're all super memorable, and almost all of them got audible laughs out of me for their personalities. The gym tests weren't just there for busy work. They were there to make me feel like there was lore behind these towns, and that these gym leaders are actually prideful of hailing from their respective towns. Of course, let's not forget Nemona, the main rival character from the game. I'm gonna say it now. Nemona might be one of my favorite rivals of all time in this entire series. That's saying something. I like her more than freaking Barry from Gen 4. But I don't want to get ahead of myself. I want to talk about different parts of these games in the future, so in-depth character analysis is outside the scope of what I'm doing right now. Over the course of the gym challenges, you meet and interact with Nimona, the regional champion, and some of the Elite Four. At first I didn't care much about any of these characters, Nimona included. I thought I had her all figured out from the very first time I met her. As for the Elite Four and champion, they felt awfully generic, which is why I was shocked when the game completely surprised me by making me absolutely enamored with all these characters by the time the Victory Road path ended. Trust me, I have a lot to say about it. I have an entire future thing planned for talking about just the Scarlet and Violet Elite Four and how this is my favorite execution of it so far. I'm also going to withhold a certain clip of me losing my mind over a big reveal during the Elite Four challenge. Just kidding, here it is right now. Wait a second. Wait, so the dude is a gym leader and the Elite Four member? Surprisingly, Victory Road ended with me just as emotional as when I reached the end of Path of Legends. The final battle against Nimona in the town square, along with the resolution of it, gave me feelings, man. Starfall Street is a mixed bag for me. I love Team Star. I love how they seem like they're another boring take on the Team Rocket type hierarchy, but then as I went on, I found out their backstory and ended up loving them. Their leaders are so endearing, and I still can't believe the game actually went into the idea that the Academy had a flawed culture in its past that led these people to become ostracized to the point of having to take things into their own hands. Deep stuff for Pokemon is all I'm saying. Again, I want to talk about all these story paths separately in the future, so I'll wait for now. But this story path, like the other two, left me with strong impressions. Now, only if the gameplay could back that up. Yeah. I love Team Star. I love their bases and their hackneyed architecture. I just wish that invading them was more fun. Auto battles are kind of a half-baked gameplay concept in these games as a whole, and, well, challenging Team Star isn't exactly the most fun part of the game. All I ended up doing was mindlessly spamming the right shoulder button to send out my front three Mons. The leader fights fare way better. They fight using their own Pokemon in a traditional battle, plus they use their Reverum-powered cars to confront you. Kind of reminds me of the Pokemon anime where Ash's Pokemon would destroy a ridiculous Team Rocket contraption, but I wish they did more with the concept. All Team Star leaders ride on Reverum cars. Having a variety of machines to destroy would have been fun. So at the end of the day, Team Star's story lives up in the actual story department, but is easily my least favorite of the three in the gameplay department. Nothing terrible or anything, I just think they could have done a lot more with it. Also, it felt way easier than the other two paths for some reason. Or is that just me? Speaking of difficulty, for the main game, I think they nailed the sweet spot, at least for those going in blind. I went in blind with no real grinding. I found my team to be evenly matched with almost every major boss fight in the main story, including the endgame. I respect Scarlet and Violet for nailing that, but the one thing that I think it lacks in is good battles to do after the story is complete. More on that in the future. The final story path that opens up once the main three are cleared is such a great finale, and is one of the reasons why I find it hard to believe people when they say that Game Freak sucks or is lazy. This game did not need a final story segment. They could have easily tied up all the loose plot points in the post-game after one short cutscene back at the Academy. Area Zero could have been a small post-game area with access to the rest of the Pokédex and the missing legendaries and the Paradox Pokémon. But what we got was straight up epic instead. You team up with Penny, who I haven't mentioned yet but is a great character central to Team Star's plot, Nimona, and Arven to get to the bottom of what's going on in Area Zero. And this is where the story all comes together. The characters talk to each other, observe each other's idiosyncrasies, point out each other's flaws. This feels like real people getting to know each other on a deeper level. Descending into Area 0 feels like descending into an alien planet. And I love how they disable riding here so you have to walk slowly and take it all in. The final battle feels like such an intense finale, and having the front of the box legendary become usable only at the very end of the final battle feels like such a huge subversion of series tradition. When the game ended, I felt like I really had been through life and death with these characters, and gotten to know them on a deeper level than when I first met them. And I like the short Ace Academy tournament epilogue quest there is to do as well. So yeah, I love the story. But what about the actual game? The Pokemon? The gameplay? Well, that's the interesting thing. I actually think that at its core, this game is good. It's really, really good. Starting with the Let's Go games, which were the series' core debut on the Switch, I've noticed a lot of emphasis on fixing what I think has always been Pokemon's biggest weakness, the lack of synergy between the overworld and battling. For games called Pokémon, there sure was a lot of time spent not seeing Pokemon in the game's world. In the old games, this is what playing the games looked like. Here I'm walking around as a dude talking to other people, and here my Pokemon are battling other Pokemon. These two feel completely different. Here in Gen 9, for the first time in a mainline game, I feel like I live in the world of Pokemon. Walking around outside of town, I see wild Pokemon everywhere, and what I see informs what I do next. Do I try catching it? Do I just knock it out of the way? Do I battle it? Everything feels super connected here, and entering and exiting battles feels seamless as heck. They've reworked everything. Now battling trainers is different too. They don't spot you from a distance, you initiate the battle by talking to them. And since trainer battles are now less viable to raising your own Pokemon, the reward for beating multiple trainers is now tied to special items. For example, the amulet coin or the lucky egg. All the core design aspects of Gen 9 just feel right for me. It feels like we finally reached the logical conclusion of what the older games did. For example, teaching moves. In the old games, I had to jump through hoops to change a Pokemon's moveset. Here, when a Pokemon learns a new move, either by level up or by TM, it knows that move forever. Just go into the menu, select which moves you want on that Pokemon, and bam, it relearns them. Despite the praises I sang over the TM machine system before I actually played the game, I was still worried about it being tedious to manage competitive teams, since for a while in the series, TMs were just infinite use. Well, as someone that's raised at least 6 fully optimized 7-star Raidmons, I can safely say that this new system is just as good. Because of how every move learned on a Pokemon is permanent, I have literally almost never had to spend time gathering materials to craft a TM. It's really balanced in the player's favor this time. Also, the raids. Oh man, the raids. I love these. They're the reason why I still play this game. I never played Sword and Shield, but I'm so happy I got on board now because according to Gen 8 veterans, these are way more interesting. Raids in this game have a dynamic rhythm and flow to them. There's phases. You have to figure them out. When to buff yourself, when to attack to build up Terra power, when to terastalize, how to stay alive when it puts up a shield. These are fun, okay? Speaking of terastalizing, great mechanic. This is the first time I've ever seen a new gimmick literally change the entire game around. I've done battles online with other people on my streams, and the tension and build up to when each of us decides to use this strategic move is so intoxicating. Terastalizing is not only a power boost to the matching type of move, it changes your Pokemon's type, and the fact that any Pokemon can be any Terra is so freaking cool. It opens up so many fun possibilities, and this mechanic for me has literally been a make or break deciding factor on whether or not I win or lose a battle or raid many times. I sincerely, truly hope that Game Freak realizes that they struck gold on this mechanic and keep it around for longer. So yeah, I love these games, and there's a lot I haven't gotten to, like some of the settings and the overall pretty great soundtrack, but now it's time to be negative, which is more fun, right? So I love Scarlet and Violet. They're some of the most fun I've had in a Pokemon, period, but they're really tough around the edges. I mean, rough. I mean, so rough that countless times on stream I've made the same joke about the game's code literally being held together by super glue and duct tape. Here's an impossible challenge. Try to play Scarlet and Violet for more than 5 minutes without the game's performance and frame rate dipping into agonizingly bad levels. It's impossible. You can't. This game runs so badly, I am honestly shocked that it manages to stay running as long as it does. Now, I'm no programmer, I'm no coder, but this is unacceptably bad. Remember how I talked about how seamless everything feels? Well, that's in theory, because actually playing this game is a frustrating exercise in wrestling with the performance in an effort to get as much done as fast as possible while the game actively discourages that by slowing down. Is this really the developer's fault though? These developers are just paid to make the game. They don't control the release schedule, they don't control staffing and budget. Something at the top is to blame, and that really bugs me because after playing Scarlet and Violet, I feel like the people that worked on this game really loved it and cared about it. In the future, hopefully I can go into some of those details and why they're cool. But right now, there's a bigger problem, and that is the fact that the game came out when it did. I've played Scarlet for countless hours. Here, this is how many. And would you believe me when I said that in all of that time, despite how unstable the game constantly feels to play, in all that time, it's only crashed once on me? They got this game working before it came out. It's playable and it's open world. You know how at the center of the game's world are the paradox Pokemon? Well, you know, thematically, that is more appropriate to this game in more ways than one. This entire game is a fucking paradox. Like I said, it runs in such an unstable manner that I've seen scenery in the distance briefly flicker. The frame rate sometimes will drop so low it's like I'm playing at 20 FPS, and even my boxes take a million years to visually load what's in them, but it almost never crashes. It's a paradox there, and it's a paradox how the game's world and object textures are so blurry, undetailed, and low res. But all the Pokemon models and character models look so good. Seriously, especially the Pokemon. This is bar none the best they've ever looked. You got actual fur, skin, and texture on them, and their animations are full of personality. It's crazy, I swear. It's a paradox that the game's writing and characters are so strong, but ordinary NPCs have never felt so pointless and unmemorable as they do now. Well, yeah, the game's not perfect, but I cherish Scarlet and Violet for what they did right, and I still have high hope that they can get better. They sold well. Freaking well. And with the amount of attention they've gotten from fans despite the mixed opinions regarding their quality at launch, they are far from dead. As of right now, Scarlet and Violet are getting a major update patch. I think it's a safe bet to assume that this patch and the future patches released will continue to fix bugs and performance issues with the game. But another thing to get excited for is what they might be doing to expand the game through additional content. I don't mind paid downloadable content or DLC in games when it is worth the money. Why, just recently I finished the game Cuphead for the first time, and I loved the main game so much that by the time you hear this, chances are that I've already paid for and completed the DLC content that just released last year. If DLC truly expands the game and adds a ton of replayability to it, I don't consider it greedy or a ripoff. But even without DLC coming out soon, which I don't exactly expect, if they just make the game run smoothly, they have already redeemed it by a lot in my eyes. The fact that I've been putting up with its shortcomings to play it this much, and still consider it one of my favorites, is a testament to how strong the core design is. So yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on these games that hopefully I can get to soon. I had too many to put in one place, so hopefully this overview serves as a nice broad piece before I dive into smaller topics like individual story paths, competitive play, the regional Pokédex, or shinies. Until then, see you next time.